Husband ignored my discomfort around his female coworker, but after uncovering their indiscretions, I've now filed for separation. One of the worst fights my husband and I ever had happened shortly after we got married, 7 years ago. A part of his family was being openly racist toward me, and for months I endured it, hoping it would stop or that he would step in. Eventually, he did confront the family member and admitted that they weren't willing to make an effort to respect me. He agreed it was best to keep distance from them, which I appreciated, painful as the whole thing was. But now I feel like something similar is playing out again, except this time it's not even a family member, it's a random coworker, a woman, and that somehow makes it all sting worse. I have been deeply hurt for months, unable to think straight, and now I just feel numb. I know I need some sort of objective perspective to help me process everything that's happened. Late last year, a new coworker joined my husband's team. He was responsible for onboarding her, and at first I didn't think much of it. But pretty quickly, he began mentioning her all the time. By early spring, he started acting cold and distant toward me, which I tried to chalk up to stress at work. After a few weeks though, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I told him he was being cruel to me for reasons I didn't understand and that I needed time away from him. That seemed to finally get through to him. He apologized profusely, told me he was feeling resentful about some of our past fights, and promised he wouldn't take me for granted anymore. To his credit, he kept that promise as best he could. But a few months later, he asked if it was okay to take the same flight as this new coworker for a business trip, just the two of them. I didn't think anything of it, but I did notice that he had never gone out of his way to travel with male coworkers, despite many years of business trips. Then, the day before the trip, he said he'd ride with her to the airport since she offered to pick him up, even though the company covers all the travel costs. That crossed a major boundary for me. I told him I was not comfortable with it, but he insisted on going together. We argued for hours, until at last he reluctantly agreed to turn down her offer. He kept saying how much he wanted both of us, and her fiancé, to become good friends. I asked him, what would he do if they weren't nice to me? I'd heard some stories about her being a bit nationalistic, and as an immigrant, that really concerned me. He admitted that if that happened, he'd just keep hanging out with them without me. That really confused and hurt me. Shouldn't his first loyalty be to me, not to new friends who might not even respect me? He tried to walk that back later, saying he hadn't given his three of us comment much thought, but I was left with the undeniable sense that maybe, for the first time, he was starting to put someone else before me. Still, a few weeks later, the four of us went out for dinner and surprisingly, it was pleasant. I thought maybe this woman just had poor boundaries around married couples but wasn't harboring any ill intentions. I started to open myself up to being friends with them, and my husband was genuinely happy to hear it. We all planned to get brunch together a few months later. Despite that, her presence continued to gnaw at me. She kept inviting herself to our weekend plans, and my husband was always eager to accept. This went on for weeks. I just couldn't figure out why he felt so obligated to give in to all her requests, when he'd always disliked changing plans in the past. In fact, with me, suggesting a change of plans usually resulted in him getting passive-aggressive. One day, he invited me out to his office's family event. We had agreed to go to a concert that night together. Unsurprisingly, the coworker showed up at the event too, and casually mentioned she'd also decided to go to the concert. She'd just buy her ticket there. Then she invited herself to join us for dinner before the show. My husband lit up while I felt frustrated, because our original plan had been to run errands before the concert, and he seemed to forget about it in his excitement. Trying to be polite, I told her we couldn't meet up immediately because we had something to do first. She looked annoyed at me for saying so, which only cemented the feeling that she prioritized her friendship with my husband over basic respect for me. On the way to run the errands, my husband and I had a huge fight. He claimed I must have told her about our errands, and that she was just suggesting to meet us for dinner afterward. I found that hard to believe. He'd been right there while I talked to her, and to be honest I was already too upset to care. I told him to go to the concert with her and that I'd just head home, but he got really upset with how I said it, insisting that if I'd put it nicely, he'd have believed I meant it. In the end, neither of us went to dinner. That experience pushed us to start couples counseling, which was his suggestion. Meanwhile, she was texting him about personal matters, even on weekends, which made me increasingly uncomfortable. Then, for his birthday, she got him an expensive, rare gift. That felt wildly inappropriate from someone who hadn't even known him a year, and considering he's her senior at work, it was almost a conflict of interest. At my request, my husband set up a group chat to coordinate the brunch with her and her fiancé. I continued to do my best to be friendly, even as she remained cold, hardly responding to my messages, but always eager to talk to my husband. Then, the morning of the scheduled brunch, she messaged the group chat exclusively addressing my husband, apologizing for having to cancel, completely ignoring me, even though I was right there in the conversation. I told my husband I felt disrespected, but he didn't see it that way, and even said he wanted to keep deepening his relationship with her. Not long after, he told me he wanted to start a weekly workout and brunch event with coworkers, including her, every weekend. I told him it made me uncomfortable, but he insisted there was nothing to hide because I was always invited. By then, I was so unhappy with the idea of spending even more time pretending to be cool with this woman, I didn't want to commit to weekly social gatherings. After weeks of arguing about it, we agreed that I would just join them for brunch. Once I actually started coming, the brunches stopped happening. All this time, counseling continued, and my husband told me that he feels resentful toward me, blaming me for blocking him from having a social life. He says I'm always getting in his way whenever someone tries to get close to him, and confessed that he's actually traumatized by me, afraid that if things go on like this, he'll never have a close friend. Hearing this felt like he was painting our entire relationship with a broad brush, but in my eyes, the real issue is the specific connection he's chasing with his female coworker. The thing is, I've tried to be reasonable. I've encouraged him to hang out with his male coworkers, even suggesting get-togethers more than once. But every time I do, he makes excuses and nothing ever happens. Yet, when it comes to his female coworker, suddenly he wants to push boundaries. He told me that even if it's not her, if there's ever another woman in the future who wants to be friends, even if I feel like that person doesn't respect our marriage or boundaries, as long as he doesn't see it that way, he wants to be able to hang out with them one-on-one, without me. According to him, just meeting up regularly doesn't mean they're having a close or inappropriate friendship. Then, 2 weeks ago, he acted withdrawn for the whole weekend. Finally, he told me that he'd sat down for a talk with his coworker and told her that I'm not comfortable with her and that he can't hang out with her privately anymore. I never even asked for that conversation. It came out of the blue. I did thank him for taking my worries seriously, but didn't find out until later that he conveniently left out another truth. While I might not be okay with her, he is, and he told her he'd still like to keep their friendship alive. That stung. Last Friday, things got even more complicated. His coworker and her fiancé offered him a ride home from work. He accepted, which I probably would have been more understanding about if he'd mentioned it to me right away. But he didn't tell me until the next day, and once again, that felt like a betrayal. Honestly, there were 3 things about that whole situation that really troubled me. First, the coworker's offer to give him a ride, even after knowing about my feelings, felt like blatant disregard for my boundaries. Why would she still offer, unless she prioritized her friendship with him over respecting our marriage? Second, he never told me about the part of his conversation where he admitted to her that he wanted to stay friends. That omission made me question his honesty. And third, every time something involves her, I feel like I can't trust him. How exhausting it is to keep fighting over someone who makes me so uncomfortable, and feeling like my own husband is defending this woman over me. At this point, I can't help thinking our core values are just too different. For me, if my husband is going to have close female friends outside of work, I need to feel comfortable with those friendships. But he says I'm being overly sensitive, overreacting, and that it's up to me to fix myself, not him to change his actions. Otherwise, he warns, he'll resent me forever. Do I really want to be with someone who might resent me for the rest of my life? Yet the thought of leaving a relationship that has lasted a third of my life terrifies me. He's not just my husband, he's been my best friend, and the pain of all this is almost too much to bear. Am I being unreasonable? Paranoid? Am I truly sabotaging his social life and the only one who needs to change? I can't shake the feeling that something's just not right. 2 days after I wrote everything down, her fiancé messaged me on Instagram. We'd barely interacted outside of that one double date, so seeing his name in my inbox made my stomach drop. He asked if we could talk somewhere public. I said yes. It wasn't obscene. It was worse. It was familiar in a way that made my body hum with recognition, like catching your husband's handwriting on a stranger's letter. My husband telling her she was the only person at work who actually got him. My husband saying he'd kept things from me because she turns everything into a drama. My husband telling her she looked stunning, A+ in a dress she'd sent a mirror selfie of and weighing in on which shoes she should wear to his team off-site. There was a heart, not a red one, a yellow one, like that made it less intimate. There was a long paragraph where he apologized for bringing up the friendship talk and not meaning to make her feel rejected, and that he wished it were simpler. I stared at those words and, for a second, I really did not recognize him. I asked why he was showing me all this. He said he didn't like being used as a prop in someone else's game. He said he was tired of hearing about how American values were under attack at his own dinner table and then watching his fiancée throw herself at a married man while calling me crazy. He said she had repeated something my husband apparently told her, they're already basically split, it's just logistics, and that's when he'd opened her phone while she was in the shower. He said they were done. He said I deserved to know. I went home with my heart in my throat. My husband was in the kitchen, making pasta like it was any other Tuesday. I put my bag down and asked him, plain, if he had told her we were basically split. He went still. He asked where I'd heard that. I told him I wasn't playing telephone and I wanted him to answer me. At first he said he didn't remember his exact wording. He said things can sound different out of context. I asked what context made that sentence okay. That's when I showed him the screenshot. I watched him go from indignation to something like smallness. He rubbed his forehead and said he'd been stupid. He said he had felt cornered in that conversation with her and that telling her I was the problem made it easier to keep her from getting upset. He said it was just venting. I asked him if he tells her she looks stunning as part of venting also. He said that wasn't fair. He said she had asked his opinion and he was trying to be encouraging because she has self-esteem issues. He said the yellow heart meant friendship. He said he had deleted some messages because he knew how I'd react if I saw them and he didn't want to fight. He said he didn't want to lose me either, and that he didn't know how to make me see what this was and what it wasn't. I told him that him deciding what I'd get to see was the problem. We sat there in the mostly dark kitchen and I felt the same exhausted, surreal feeling I'd felt 7 years ago when he told me his family member didn't mean it that way. I asked him if he had told his therapist about using me as the villain to keep another woman comfortable. He said no. I asked him if he had told me the truth when he said he didn't want to hang out with her privately anymore. He said he had meant it at the time. I asked him when at the time was. He cried then. It wasn't melodramatic, just tears sliding down his face while he tried to speak carefully. He said he didn't realize how deep he was until he kept checking his phone in the grocery store to see if she'd replied about some stupid joke. He said it made him feel lit up to be treated like he was interesting and funny and not the guy who forgot to put the sheets in the dryer. He said he hated himself for saying that out loud. He said he didn't know how to reverse it. He asked me what I wanted him to do. I told him 3 things. He needed to put it in writing to her that he'd crossed a line and that they would not have contact outside of necessary work communications. He needed to remove himself from any position of authority over her, which meant disclosing to HR, today, and he needed to find somewhere else to sleep while we figured out if there was anything left to salvage. He flinched at the HR part like I'd slapped him. He said that could cost him his job. I said this could cost me my marriage. He stared at the floor for a long time and then asked if he could at least get an emergency session with our counselor before making any decisions. I said fine, but the sleeping somewhere else wasn't negotiable. He went to the guest room that night and lay awake while I listened to him not sleeping. The next morning he sent a long email to HR that I didn't read, and he forwarded me the confirmation that they'd scheduled a call with him for later that afternoon. He texted her before that. He showed me the text. It said, "I've let things get blurry and that's not fair to my marriage or to you. I won't be meeting or texting outside of work-related things anymore. I'm going to ask to be moved off your chain to keep things clean. Please don't contact me outside work." There wasn't an apology in there for me, but for once I didn't want to edit him. She didn't reply to him right away. Instead, she emailed me directly from her personal account. "You don't know me," she wrote, "and you've been cruel about me because of your own insecurity. It's sad. He deserves better." I didn't answer. I forwarded it to him in HR. HR moved quickly. He came home a couple days later, his face blank in that way where you can't tell if someone's going to throw up or fall asleep. He said HR took it seriously. He said he had admitted to poor boundaries, to being her senior, to the gift. He said they were reassigning her to a different manager immediately and putting a note in his file. He said they promised anonymity to the extent possible, which we both knew meant half the office would be whispering by next week. He said he hadn't seen her at her desk that day. He said he didn't know if she was crying somewhere or building a case against him. That night I packed a suitcase. He watched me fold shirts without saying anything. When I zipped it, he finally asked where I was going. I told him my friend had a spare room for a month and that I needed to get away from the geometry of our apartment, where every corner was an argument we'd already had. He asked if I wanted him to move out instead. I said I needed to be in a space that didn't have his underwear in the dryer and his coffee in the cupboard. I asked him to please feed the plants. I made it 2 nights before her fiancé called again. He sounded tired, the kind of tired where even his voice sat down. He said she had packed a bag too, and that she was telling people at work I was controlling and had made my husband file a fake complaint to get her fired. He said he was worried she might show up at my place. I told him I was staying somewhere else and thanked him for the heads up. She didn't show up. What happened instead was quieter and uglier. Another woman from my husband's team, one I'd always liked, texted me and asked if I could talk. She said she'd been at lunch the previous week and overheard my name. She said the coworker had made a comment about how in some cultures, women don't understand friendship between the sexes and laughed in a way that dared the table to disagree. She said my husband hadn't laughed, but he also didn't say anything. She said she regretted not speaking up in that moment and that she was sorry. I brought that to our counselor. I brought the screenshots. I brought the email. I brought the ugly thing I haven't wanted to name out loud, which is that I do not believe this woman would treat me with basic respect even if my husband evaporated. He sat across from me and stared at his hands and whispered that he believed me. He said he hated that he had not seen that sooner and that, on some level, he must have seen it and kept walking anyway. He moved to his brother's place. HR reassigned his direct reports. She took a few days off and then came back to a different team. I've heard exactly one thing about her since, that she told someone in the break room that she didn't understand how her friendship had become a cultural issue, and that she was considering legal action for hostile environment. I have no idea if that's bluster or real, and I don't have it in me to care beyond keeping receipts. A week into living out of a suitcase, I sat on my friend's couch and stared at a pen like it was poisonous. A divorce attorney had emailed me her intake forms. My husband had sent 3 long messages about the book his therapist recommended and how he had written a letter to himself about boundaries and how he wanted to show me. I read none of them. I did call him and told him I would sit down with him one more time, in our counselor's office, to talk about whether we were building anything, besides a pile of good intentions and apologies. That session was yesterday. He looked wrecked. He said he had told HR they could copy me on any documentation of the reassignment. He said he had blocked her personal accounts and told his team he wouldn't be at the next few social events. He said emotional affair out loud without flinching or arguing with the words. He said he wasn't asking me for forgiveness yet and that he understood if I never got there. He said he had already signed up for a different role at the company that would have him in a different building, with a pay cut, so I wouldn't have to wonder every morning if she was at the next desk. I told him that none of this guaranteed anything. That I could appreciate the steps and still not choose to be married to him. I told him I was making an appointment with the attorney because I wanted to know my options in concrete terms, and that knowing them would make any choice I made an actual choice instead of a threat or a reaction. When I left, he walked me to the elevator and didn't try to touch me. He said, very quietly, "I'm so ashamed." I said, equally quietly, "I know," and got in. I don't know yet where this lands. I do know that I am no longer going to beg the person who vowed to protect me to pick me. He will or he won't, and I will live with whichever version of my life contains the least amount of self-erasure. For the first time in months, that sentence doesn't scare me half as much as it used to. It just sounds like a future. I met the attorney in a glass box that smelled like lemon cleaner and old paper. She wore navy and didn't do the sympathetic head tilt. She slid a pen toward me and said, "You don't have to decide. You just have to understand." There was a phrase I hadn't thought about before, postnuptial agreement, and the way she said it made it sound like a firebreak, not a threat. She asked what I would need in order to even consider staying. I said I didn't know, because every time I thought about it my chest felt like a car alarm. She said that was fine. She said knowing my options would quiet the alarm enough to hear my own voice. He dropped the devices off and came to meet me in the late afternoon, outside a coffee shop. He stood with his hands jammed in his jacket like a teenager and said, "They pulled Slack logs and calendar metadata. They said if there were deleted messages they could request copies from the carrier." He swallowed hard. "There's something I didn't tell you." I didn't say anything. The barista inside banged a portafilter. The sound knocked against my teeth. "We kissed," he said. Quiet, like he was confessing to the sidewalk. "Once. It was after that team off-site in June. We were walking out at the same time and he stopped. It was stupid. It was like 2 seconds. I panicked and said I had to call an Uber and went the other way. I have thought about it every day since and pretended I wasn't." My ears rang. I looked past him at a little girl smearing her muffin into the window glass and her mother laughing as she tried to stop her. I felt very aware of my wrists. He reached out, then pulled his hand back like he'd found a stove there. "I'm telling you because HR is going to find it and because you deserve it for me first," he said. "I am not asking you to forgive it. I know what it is." I went to the bathroom and locked the door and crouched by the trash can for a few minutes just to get gravity back in the right direction. When I opened my phone there was a voicemail from her fiancé. He said he'd found a voice memo in her notes app where she'd recorded herself practicing what to say to my husband the next time we're alone. His voice shook. She says, "You freaked out after the kiss but you don't need to, nobody has to know." I sent it to myself because I don't want it living on my phone anymore, he said, and then there was the sharp little electronic sound of a file arriving. HR scheduled time with me. I sat in a conference room that had a white dish of mints nobody took and a view of the parking structure. A woman with careful eyeliner and a man with a laptop asked me to walk through the timeline and whether I had anything beyond the screenshots and the email and what I had just learned. I told them what I knew. I said I wasn't interested in telling them what to do, only in making sure nobody wrote me out of my own marriage and then called it culture. The woman nodded, once, like a metronome, and asked for permission to retain the email I'd forwarded. "For the record," she said, and I almost laughed out loud at how stupid that phrase is when your life is the record. 2 hours later, a certified letter arrived at my friend's place addressed to both of us. It used words like defamation and retaliatory interference and accused me of weaponizing cultural identity to impugn my client's reputation. My friend's dog barked at it on the coffee table like it had a smell. I scanned it and sent it to the attorney. She wrote back 2 sentences that unhooked something at the base of my skull. "Do not engage. Truth is an absolute defense." The next day the fiancé texted me a screenshot of her telling a group chat she was lawyering up against the witch hunt. He added, "She still hasn't told her parents why I left." He was placed on paid leave pending the investigation. He texted me from his brother's couch a photo of a sleeping golden retriever on his shins and wrote, "I know that this looks like a man who wants sympathy. I don't want that. I just wanted you to see something that isn't a spreadsheet or a Slack log." I didn't answer. I went to the grocery store and bought fruit I didn't want to taste because the idea of cooking still felt like picking glass out of soup. In the checkout line I saw her behind me, because the universe is not subtle. She had a canvas tote and sunglasses on her head like a headband and she looked exactly the way someone looks when they are about to pretend they ran into you. "I'm sorry you're going through this," she said. My mouth did not form the reply she expected. I said, "I didn't invite you into it," and then I paid and left my bag of ginger in the cart by accident and walked home with the cart's squeaky phantom wheel in my ear. He asked to meet with our counselor again and I said fine. He brought a printed thing, double-spaced like a term paper. "It's a timeline," he said. "There are no explanations in it. It's just dates and what I did on those dates. You don't have to read it." He looked 10 years older. I slid it back across the table. "I don't want to hold an autopsy report," I said. He nodded. He said he'd spoken to his own therapist about writing a postnuptial agreement that gives me the majority of our assets and a trigger clause that transfers funds if he breaches the boundary again. "It's not penance," he said. "It's a structure so you don't have to rely on my intentions." He said the words like he'd peeled them out of his throat one by one. He said he'd already called a notary. I don't want to talk you into anything, he added. I know I don't get to do that anymore. I just want to put doors where there were only walls. The next morning, HR called to say they were concluding the initial phase of the investigation. They had interviews to finish and documents to review. They said they would be taking corrective action but could not share specifics with me. 10 minutes later he told me anyway. Demotion, he said. Different building, different team, formal write-up. No bonus this cycle. They said if anything else surfaces I'm gone. He stared at his shoes. I know you didn't want this from me, he said, and I know this is the minimum. He added that he had put in a transfer request that HR said would likely be approved. I also told them I would resign if that's what you needed. He said it like he'd already swallowed that outcome and was just waiting to see if it would dissolve. A woman from his team, not the one who'd called me before, sent me a message from her personal account. She said she had filed her own report with HR after lunch last month when the coworker made a joke about my passport wife attitude and nobody laughed. I should have said something then, she wrote. I'm saying it now. She attached a photo she'd taken of a whiteboard in a conference room where someone had written "No politics today" and below it, in different handwriting, unless it's yours. The pettiness of it felt like a paper cut. You don't realize how much you're bleeding until you look down. My attorney drafted a postnup according to my notes, not a list but a shape, the outline of a life I could tolerate. He asked to sign it without changing a single word. When the notary stamped it, the sound was satisfying in a way that made me feel a little monstrous. He transferred money into an account with only my name on it and sent me the confirmation without a caption. He moved into a month-to-month studio with a Murphy bed and a window that looked across at another window. He sent a picture of the plant from our kitchen thriving under a cheap clamp lamp and wrote, I know you asked me to feed them. I am. Even when my stomach flips at the thought of being in the apartment. Her legal letter became several legal letters. There were phrases like hostile work environment and adverse employment action undertaken at the behest of spouse and a sentence that tried to rebrand a kiss as a misunderstood workplace greeting. I don't know if her lawyer believed that, or if he just liked how it sounded. HR asked me for one more meeting and I brought my receipts and my silence and let their process do whatever it was going to do. I am tired of standing in rooms explaining why my dignity is not a cultural preference. 2 nights ago, I sat on the edge of the fold-out bed at my friend's place and took off my ring and put it in the pocket of my coat like I was misplacing a quarter on purpose. I called him. I said I had retained the attorney and filed for legal separation, not because I wanted to punish him, but because I needed our reality to catch up with the truth. He breathed in like someone had opened a window on a cold day. Does that mean no? He asked. It means we are not married in the way that word means right now, I said. And I don't know if we will be again. He said he would be where I told him to be, that he would sign what I handed him, that he would continue therapy and continue not seeing her and continue living with his shame, and that if, in a year, the shape of us looked different, he hoped we would recognize it. He didn't ask for a timeline. He didn't say he would wait forever. He said, I understand that my choices put me outside the circle, and I will not run laps around you asking to be let back in. This morning, the fiancée sent one last file, a screen recording of her Instagram story of a book cover about female friendships in the workplace with a caption about betrayal that didn't name me but tried to. I closed my phone. I walked to a little park with a bench that faces a row of ginkgo trees turning that particular yellow that looks like a decision. I sat there for an hour and watched leaves fall with no drama at all. It didn't feel like winning or losing. It felt like air coming back into a room I'd been standing in for too long. I went home and washed the fruit. I ate it. It tasted like fruit. I don't know yet if I am keeping the ring in my coat or if I am taking it to a jeweler to make it into something else. For now, it is a small, heavy truth in a pocket I can reach into and touch when I need to remind myself that I am holding my own life. 3 weeks after I put the ring in my coat, a man with a clipboard knocked while I was trying to zest a lemon without thinking about anything. He said my name in the tone people use when they already know the answer. He handed me a packet with my name and my husband's name and hers, all braiding together on the first page like a dare. Complaint, he said, like that word meant a weather pattern I should have checked. I set it on the counter next to the lemon zest and texted my attorney a photo. She called 10 minutes later and said, "We'll answer." You do not respond to her directly. I said I wasn't planning to write a manifesto in notes and screenshot it. She laughed, once, purely out of professionalism. HR closed their process the same week by sending me a sentence that said they had taken appropriate corrective action. He told me what that meant before their email did. He stood outside the same coffee shop and said, "She's gone." He did not say fired, did not say resigned. He said gone like the air had been sucked out of the room and we were all watching the blinds slowly stop moving. An hour later, someone sent me her LinkedIn post. On to new challenges, it said, with a little green open to work ribbon and a paragraph about misunderstandings that taught me so much. My thumb hovered over the little heart icon it offers you for empathy. I put my phone in a drawer and made myself a grilled cheese like I was 35 and in college. There were small, strange kindnesses threaded through the static. A junior woman from his team emailed me from a Gmail I didn't recognize and wrote, "I filed my own report. I didn't like how she talked about people's accents like they were quirky character traits. I'm sorry. She attached a photo of a cartoon bear stuck in a door someone had taped to a monitor with a caption in a Sharpie bubble, "Boundaries matter," and I had to sit down on the floor because something about that stupid bear made me want to cry and laugh at the same time. His aunt texted me, because of course she did. "This is what happens when you marry outside your value system," she wrote, and for once I didn't even get the first flinch out before he sent me a screenshot. His reply, just 3 words, "Do not contact," and then the gray blocked bubble. He didn't circle it or add commentary. He just forwarded it the way you send proof of life. Her fiancé brought the dog over to the park one afternoon and sat on the bench like it was holding him up by the shoulders. He told me he'd taken his name off the lease and she'd kept the blender and the kickboxing gloves and a set of towels he bought on sale because he said he liked how hotel they felt. He said he had told her parents the truth, and that they had looked at him like he'd walked mud into a shrine. He stopped and rubbed his hands together and said, "I thought I was going to marry her," and I said, "I did marry mine," and we sat there with the dog panting like a metronome and the trees doing their job. The attorney filed whatever needs filing when someone sues you for telling the truth. She said motion and jurisdiction and the burden is not yours, and I nodded like any of those syllables could hold a feeling. A week later, her lawyer sent another letter with phrases like chilling effect on my client's career prospects and cultural vendetta. My attorney replied with dates and attachments and a sentence that read like a knife sliding into fruit, "My client will not be participating in your fiction." I realized, with a small ugly thrill I'm not proud of, that watching someone protect me without making me prove that I need protecting is my new favorite drug. I went back to the apartment on a Tuesday to pack the winter clothes and donate the summer ones that still smelled like 3 years ago. The place had the stillness of a museum at closing. On the counter, the expensive rare thing she'd given him sat in its box with a receipt for a donation stapled to it and a post-it in his handwriting. Gone. Next to it, a key on a little brass tag that said home like a joke. I checked the plants. They were alive. He'd moved the rubber tree away from the vent without me telling him to. On the fridge, under the magnet shaped like a sardine tin, he'd taped a printout, draft language for a postnuptial clause and the notary stamp underneath it. He hadn't left an apology letter. He had left paperwork. It landed more gently than flowers. There were still stupid ambushes. I was scanning my grocery club card when I heard her voice behind me again, of course again. "I'm glad you're setting boundaries," she said, the way someone might say I like your shoes when they hate them. I didn't turn around. I said, "You are not my boundary to set," and left a bag of limes on the conveyor because my hands were shaking. On the walk home a woman pushing a stroller smiled at me for no reason and I almost stopped her to thank her like she'd done me a favor. He kept doing the small, good things that don't feel like currency but accumulate anyway. He sent me a screen of his direct deposit split, the increased transfer into the account with only my name. He emailed me his resignation letter, unsent and saved as a draft, subject line blank. "If you need this," he wrote under it, "say when." He told me he'd signed up for a standing 7 a.m. group at the community center where you sit in a circle and say things out loud without anyone clapping. He said, "I tell the truth there and nobody shatters." Her complaint got a docket number. My attorney put it in a folder with my name on it and said the judge assigned to it is no nonsense. Deposition dates floated like ghosts on an Outlook calendar, then flickered and moved. I bought a blouse that didn't make me look like I was going to a funeral. I thought about what it would feel like to sit under a fluorescent light and answer questions about my marriage into a little black microphone. I thought about the sound a pencil makes on legal pad paper when someone writes down your name and leaves space afterward for what you did. A woman from her new team, because of course she found a new team before the ink was dry, DM'd me from a blank Instagram account to tell me she'd shown up her first day with a fresh haircut and a book about leaning in and a story about how jealous wives ruin everything. Then the next day, the same woman sent another message that simply said, "I'm sorry, maybe for telling me. Maybe for believing her. Maybe for all of us." On a Sunday, he asked if I would meet him at the apartment so we could take the bookshelf down together, the one we bought our first year that never quite fit the wall. He said he couldn't get it to budge without splintering it. We sat on the floor with an Allen wrench and a bowl of screws and took it apart the way you end a cult, slowly, decisively, with eye contact. When we got to the last plank he said, "My therapist asked me what it felt like to say I am ashamed and have it be true instead of performative." He stared at the empty wall. "It feels like being in an unheated room and deciding not to put on a coat." I signed a 6-month lease on a place with a view of a parking lot and 3 trees in a row that looked like punctuation. The landlord handed me the keys on a lanyard that said a bank name in teal letters I immediately took off. I bought a lamp that turns on by touch and a set of plates that don't match anything on purpose. I hung one picture, just one, a photo of a shoreline I took years ago where the horizon is crooked and honest. The night before her first hearing date, because this is a joke that tells itself, she posted a story of herself in a mirror wearing a suit with a caption about war paint. I did not watch it twice. In the morning, I wore the blouse that made me feel like myself and met my attorney in a hallway that had chairs built to remind you you're in a building with rules. We didn't get far. Her lawyer asked for a continuance and the judge, the one my attorney called no nonsense, said, "Next date is firm." I stood there and realized I had been bracing for a blow that didn't land and that the relief of that also hurts. When I got home, the ring was still in my coat pocket, heavier for the way I have not touched it. I took it out and put it in a little ceramic dish shaped like a hand someone gave me at a holiday once. It sits on my windowsill now, palm up, catching the light like it's listening. I don't know if it's waiting. I don't know if I am. I watered the 3 plants I let myself buy and watched the soil go dark, one circle at a time. Outside, the 3 trees wrote their tiny poem against a very ordinary sky. I sat with that and nothing else and did not check my phone until the kettle whistled.